5 human rights campaigners in Zimbabwe have been arrested and charged with plotting to overthrow the government. The current leadership was elected in 2018, a year after what some have called a choreographed coup to overthrow Robert Mugabe.
So journalist and Zimbabwean native Douglas Rogers details that event in his book, 2 Weeks in November, which focuses on the group of people who he calls the message controllers, who teamed up to manage the media and diplomatic efforts. Rogers joins us now to discuss the book and to share his take on what is happening in Zimbabwe now. Thank you so much for joining us. Tell us a little bit about this book. And you know, Zimbabwe is not something that is on the radar of many Americans. So just describe the situation and then tell us what you delve into.
Right. So Zimbabwe, southern African country, just north of South Africa, has for the last 37 years had been ruled by one man, Robert Mugabe, one party, ZANU-PF, and in November of 2017. He was removed in a coup that, in my book, it's basically they removed him in the perfect coup, and the book reimagines what a military coup really is. We have a impression in the West of how military coups take place, and they're usually bloody, very violent affairs. What happened in Zimbabwe in November 2017 was an incredibly sophisticated political, diplomatic, and media operation, and that's what I detail in the book.
So talk a little bit about that. Like, how were they able to create this perception, media perception of a coup when the reality was very different than what people thought?
So the coup was a two-pronged operation, a military operation. Zimbabwe is a very powerful and modern army, and they provided the firepower. They removed, the goal was to get rid of the president, Robert Mugabe, although the people carrying out the coup were from the same party.
Right. They wanted to keep the regime, right? It was
so they
more
kept the regime. Right. They kept the party but removed the leader. Except what they did was very, very clever. The military moved in, and in special forces overnight, in a sophisticated operation, cut off the faction that was loyal to the president. But instead of saying in a normal coup, we're getting rid of the president, we're bringing in someone else, they said the president is still the president the next day. So people looked around and said, what on earth is happening? Like, why, if you're going to remove someone, why are you saying he's still there?
Right.
And that's what I reveal in the book, is there was a second prong, and that was the media operation, a diplomatic operation run by a team of rivals who were based mostly in Johannesburg, but they were Zimbabwean expatriates. There was an internationally renowned human rights lawyer, a Zimbabwean diplomat, politician who was close to Mugabe at one time, and most interestingly was a secret agent spy who teamed up with the businessman he was sent to assassinate in South Africa. Wow. And they became part of this team who over a year met to spin this story.
It's crazy.
That is absolutely wild. I mean, what are the implications for this for the future of Zimbabwe? I mean, the criticism of Mugabe is, destroyed the country, mass inflation, destroyed a once thriving and great country. Are things going to change, even though the current regime is still in place?
Well, they're still in place, and not much has changed.
Right.
Although under the surface it may be changing. That's what the current president, Emerson Mnangagwa, is saying. But the implications that I bring about in the book are more tied to how the modern world is all about narrative and spin, and it's a world of fake news. We live in two different worlds. It applies to America or, say, Venezuela or Sudan, where everything is actually about narrative. It's about messaging. So if you, when they carried out the operation, they had to make it legitimate within Zimbabwe. And to do so, 1 million people went onto the streets because they also wanted to get rid of Mugabe, okay? But these were former enemies now, together, demanding his removal. But what I show in the book is that the elements of this were completely choreographed. So the part of the team that I interviewed, this media team, they would have guys on tanks. There were people on tanks demanding Mugabe go with loudhailers, and then I reveal in the book that these guys were part of this team. It's all choreographed and very well planned and thought out so that
To
the
create
international-
the appearance of spontaneity, but in
Yes, of legitimacy, but also so that the international community and the regional community will accept it as legitimate.
Right.
Because you cannot, in the modern world, have an illegitimate government. You need to be seen to be democratic, to have come in with the approval of your population. And that's what they managed to do. They managed to get people from different sides onto the streets so that the world looking on said, oh, actually, this is legitimate. They all want the dictator gone.
Do you think this has already served as a model that others have looked at around the world?
Well, in Sudan, they have had, they're also calling it a coup that was not a coup. This is what they did in Zimbabwe. When they said the president is still the president, they were calling it it's not a coup. So the meme in Zimbabwe became a coup that was not a coup. Sudan has had a very similar situation. Immediately after what happened in Zimbabwe, the South African government, it wasn't a coup, but the South African government removed their Jacob Zuma as president. So within a very short space of time, you've had changes of governments in Africa that are quite legitimate. Well, they seem to be legitimate. In Venezuela, that's to me that was a very different operation. It's very military controlled, and the international community took a side, whereas the Zimbabwean operation was very closely choreographed and managed so that the international community would all buy into it.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
And so we may not all be plotting a coup,
Right.
but the lesson of how important the narrative and the messaging, the storytelling is in the modern world, I think is a really important one. So, like, if you were going to give tips based on this operation, I mean, what were some of the things that were successful? What did they think about in order to create this overwhelming perception?
Well, it was largely non-violent. There were some casualties, but a normal. If anyone looking at Zimbabwe before November said this is what the military are going to do, you would have expected an absolute bloodbath, and it didn't happen. One of the team members that I write about, the human rights lawyer, was literally on phone calls, listening in on phone calls with the military while they were carrying out the military operation, telling them, do not kill journalists, do not beat people up, do not do this and this and this. So they planned that kind of, they planned to that level to make it not ugly, not bloody. That would be the first thing that I would say. If you can carry out a coup without killing people, is the way to make it legitimate.
Right.
All right.
Fascinating.
Good tips for a coup. Thank you. Really interesting story and something I didn't know much about. So thank you so much for bringing it to us.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks very much.
And we will have more Rising after this.